Welcome to CDFA's 2025 Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, or SCBGP, Additional Assistance for Limited Resource Applicants webinar. Today we will have a brief overview of the SCBGP, discuss the Additional Assistance Program, offer guidance on specific sections of the application, and discuss requirements for managing this federal award. The Specialty Crop Block Grant Program is funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture Agricultural Marketing Services. The purpose of the SCBGP is to enhance the competitiveness of California specialty crops. The program priorities we'll discuss later in this presentation are intended to help applicants develop proposals that meet the purpose through this competitive process. Projects cannot benefit a single organization or single individuals. Specialty crops are fruits, including dried fruits, vegetables, and tree nuts, culinary and medicinal herbs and spices, and nursery, floriculture, and horticultural crops. Commodities such as dairy, livestock, eggs, grains, and cannabis are not eligible. There is a list of specialty crops on the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA website, but it is not all-inclusive. If there are any questions about whether a commodity is eligible, please feel free to ask. The Additional Assistance Program was developed to increase participation in the SCBGP among smaller organizations that may not have the resources, staffing, or capacity to easily apply for and administer a federal grant award. Participants in the program receive one-on-one application assistance and continued support in administering their projects. SCBGP funds cannot directly benefit those organizations, but CDFA can provide technical assistance and administrative support throughout the process, including in the development of a concept proposal, which should help participants expand their capacity to apply for and administer grant funds. In this program, USDA receives funding from the Farm Bill, then approved funding goes to CDFA, and CDFA sub-awards funds to recipients. Authorization for this program was established under the Specialty Crops Competitiveness Act of 2004. The 2025 One Big Beautiful Bill Act contains provisions for the continuation of this program. For this program, the award amounts range from $75,000 to $250,000. Projects cannot be longer than 2 years and 8 months, beginning on or after November 1st, 2026, and ending by June 30th, 2029. Note that all grant activities, including mandatory outreach of project results and completing final reports and invoices, cannot occur any later than June 30th, 2029. So we recommend that projects end their main activities no later than a few months ahead of these deadlines and dedicate the final few months of their projects to these outreach and grant management tasks. The timeline for the entire solicitation process can be found in the Request for Concept Proposals, or RFCP. Please note that concept proposals to the Additional Assistance Program are due on January 12, 2026 at 5 p.m. Late submissions will not be accepted. Successful concept proposal applicants will be invited to the second stage to submit a more detailed version of their proposal called a scope of work. Applicants will be notified in March whether they are invited to submit a scope of work and will have approximately 4 weeks to prepare their application with the help of a CDFA grant analyst. Scopes of work will be due in April 2026. CDFA will then submit the proposal recommendations to USDA in May and wait for USDA's final say regarding which projects receive funding. We anticipate announcing and awarding funds in the fall of 2026. Note that all funding decisions are made by the USDA, and participation in the Additional Assistance Program does not guarantee a project will be selected for submission to USDA or for funding. The timeline and requirements of the Additional Assistance Program differ from those of the conventional SCBGP application. First, applicants will submit concept proposals for their projects via email. Those applications go through an administrative and technical review, and the applicants with successful proposals are invited to submit a scope of work. Applicants are welcome to email grants@cdfa.ca.gov at any time with questions regarding their concept proposal. Submissions should also be to grants@cdfa.ca.gov. Additional assistance applicants will not go through the conventional process for Phase 2. Instead, successful projects will be assigned to a grant analyst to develop a full proposal or scope of work for USDA's consideration. Projects that do not advance to the scope of work phase will receive feedback to assist with developing a proposal in future years. Eligibility for this solicitation is limited to nonprofit organizations, tribal governments, both federally and non-federally recognized, and K-12 school districts. Organizations which are not eligible to apply under this program are encouraged to partner with an eligible organization and can act as a contractor on their proposal. A few additional notes on eligibility. Only organizations that have not previously received SCBG funds are eligible. If you have received SCBGP funding as a contractor or subcontractor for a project, you are still eligible for this program. Also, this program is intended for organizations that do not have technical expertise with grant writing, including the capacity to hire or contract with a grant writing consultant. It is important to note that if your organization applies to the Additional Assistance Program, you are limited to one proposal in total. In other words, organizations cannot submit one additional assistance proposal and one conventional proposal, or multiple additional assistance proposals. Organizations may use a fiscal sponsor if they do not have a formal certification. However, the use of a fiscal sponsor to circumvent eligibility requirements is not allowable. Here are a few examples of eligible projects for the Additional Assistance Program. These projects enhance the market competitiveness of specialty crops and support either small or beginning farmers, or provide nutritional education and/or access to specialty crops in low-resource communities. And here are a few examples of projects that would not be eligible for SCBGP funding. Grant funds will not be awarded for projects that directly benefit or provide a profit to a single organization, institution, or individual. For example, the program will not fund a project to start or expand a farm or business venture, including a nonprofit venture, or to provide donations to individuals. Also, grant funds cannot be used to grow or plant food that will ultimately be donated or given away. Grant funds also cannot be used to compete unfairly with private companies that offer equivalent products or services. This includes construction costs to modify or improve existing facilities or land, such as installing irrigation or renovating a community kitchen. Please see the Additional Assistance RFCP for more details on eligibility. As previously mentioned, you can request assistance on project-specific questions to assist you with project development. For example, you can submit questions on activities that may be unallowable or unreasonable, or ask for assistance in developing some portion of the concept proposal. If you would like assistance developing a proposal, or for general questions, including the allowability of costs and activities, or for assistance with the application, please complete the inquiry form. This form will ask some basic questions about your project idea and organization to confirm your project is eligible for the program. You can also contact the Office of Grants Administration at grants@cdfa.ca.gov. Please put additional assistance in your email subject line. You can also email to schedule a phone or video call if you prefer. Applications to the Additional Assistance Program will be submitted via email. To receive a copy of the application form, please complete the interest form or email grants@cdfa.ca.gov. You will submit the application by returning it to grants@cdfa.ca.gov no later than 5 p.m. on Monday, January 12, 2026. In developing a concept proposal, applicants will need to provide information on each of the areas in this slide. There are a few areas we want to bring to your attention. Applicant information. Please note that if your organization is fiscally sponsored, the applicant is your fiscal sponsor. If grant funds are awarded, the grant agreement will be with the sponsor organization. Program priorities. Each proposal must select one program priority. You may select more than one, but this is not mandatory. Project beneficiaries. The number of project beneficiaries should be reasonable and trackable during the grant duration. We sometimes see proposals that state everyone will benefit or all specialty crop farmers will benefit. That may be possible, but it isn't likely to be easily trackable or reportable in the grant duration. Having more beneficiaries does not mean a proposal is more or less likely to receive funding. Outcome measures. We'll discuss this in a later slide, but like project beneficiaries, the information provided should be reasonable and achievable within the grant duration. Budget. We encourage all applicants to double check their budget. Typos or math errors can affect eligibility or cause a project to be disqualified if the budget exceeds the amount allowable. Excessive unallowable costs can also result in the project being disqualified. We will discuss the budget in more detail later in the presentation. In the next few slides, we'll briefly go over the Additional Assistance Program priorities. We aren't going to review each priority individually, but you will need to identify one in your proposal. You can review the RFCP for these priorities. The first four are on this slide. And here are the next four priorities. Here are the next four priorities. Here are three more of the priorities. And here are the final three priorities for this program. As a reminder, the priorities can be reviewed more closely by reading the request for concept proposals. The project purpose is where you will describe how your project answers the question, is the project a priority for the specialty crop industry? Thoroughly explain the issue, problem, or need of the specialty crop industry that your project will address. Be sure to discuss this in relation to the program priorities you have identified. Remember to describe how your project targets an external problem facing the specialty crop industry rather than an internal problem facing your organization or the populations your organization works with. Describe the issue in detail and use data to support your arguments. Also, be sure to establish why your organization is well equipped to address this issue. In the second text box, explain why the issue you've identified is important and timely for the specialty crop industry. This is also the place to list specific specialty crops that will be effective, if possible. Keep in mind the ultimate purpose of all projects must be to enhance the competitiveness of California's specialty crops. This question is worth 15 points. The next question is about project sustainability. USDA and CDFA want awarded projects to have a long-term impact without relying indefinitely on grant funding. So in the text box provided, explain how your project will become self-sustaining beyond the grant duration. For example, if your project will create a new program, outline a plan for how the program will continue to exist after the end of the grant period. Or for projects that will not continue beyond the grant duration, describe how the results of your project will continue to benefit California's specialty crop industry after the project is complete. For example, many educational projects will create materials that will continue to be used after the grant ends. This question is worth 10 points. Projects should have the support of the specialty crop industry. The external project support question is worth 10 points. Here, identify at least one specific specialty crop stakeholder and explain why they believe the project is timely and important. Specialty crop stakeholders are individuals or organizations involved in the specialty crop industry. Support from the applicant, employees of the applicant, cooperating entities, contractors, or any other entity that will receive project funding should not be included. Applicants are not required to submit formal letters of support to demonstrate external support. The next question asks you to identify and describe the project beneficiaries. In the first box, estimate the approximate number of project beneficiaries. The number should be reasonable, trackable, and reportable. In the next text box, describe how the number of beneficiaries was determined, who the beneficiaries are, and how they will benefit from the results of the project. Note that beneficiaries identified should be direct or primary beneficiaries of the project results. This typically does not include secondary beneficiaries, such as employees of the applicant organization, or excessive number of beneficiaries, such as all the farmers in California. Also keep in mind that projects directly benefiting a single individual or individuals are not allowed. It is expected that projects will benefit some segment of the specialty crop industry. Lastly, if possible, identify the specific specialty crops that will be affected. This question is worth 10 points. The next section is the project work plan and outreach. In the objective text box, identify the main goals the project is seeking to accomplish. Below the objective text box, describe the tasks necessary to accomplish each of the identified project objectives. The work plan should also indicate who will be responsible for each activity. Note that anyone who is designated to receive funding in the budget must be listed in the work plan. Also estimate when each activity will occur. Be sure the dates for all activities are within the specified project duration. Please use a month-year format for the dates. Also describe the project's outreach component. In other words, how the project results will be shared with the target audience, stakeholders, and other interested parties beyond those directly involved in the project. Some examples of outreach include conference presentations, journal articles, educational materials, or website content. Note that efforts to advertise the program to participants, such as to gain students for an educational project, do not equal outreach of project results. This question is worth 15 points. This is an example of what the work plan looks like. In this example, the first objective is to develop a specialty crop nutrition campaign, and the box below describes the activities necessary to complete this objective with the timeline and personnel responsible for each activity. Please remember to ensure all personnel included in the budget are also listed in the work plan. This also includes contractors. Next is where the project outcome measures are selected. In this section, you will identify one or more outcome measures to demonstrate that the project will enhance the competitiveness of California specialty crops. The outcome measures template is worth 10 points. Here's an example of what the outcome measures section looks like. Please note that this sample does not include all of the available outcome measures. You will select at least one outcome measure and associated indicator or sub-indicator. In the text box below, you will provide details about the activities that this project will conduct to collect data, measure, and track the progress towards the selected indicators or sub-indicator. Note that only one outcome measure is required. You will not necessarily be awarded more points for selecting additional outcomes or indicators. All selected outcome measures must be tracked and reported upon, so please select the one or few that best fit your project. The last section of the application is the budget narrative. This is a Word document you will complete separately from the Adobe application form. All items listed in your budget template must support enhancing the competitiveness of specialty crops and directly relate to the project objectives. The budget template is worth 15 points. Within the budget narrative, you'll provide a detailed breakdown and justification for all project costs. As you develop your budget, ensure that all costs are necessary for the project, well justified, and clearly linked to the project activities and objectives. It should be clear why costs are requested and how they relate to the activities listed in the project objectives and work plan. The budget narrative is a best estimate based on current information. However, please make sure your estimates are reasonable and are not over or understated. Providing a breakdown of the cost per unit helps clarify how the estimates for each cost were calculated. Please do not enter any number without a breakdown or explanation. Costs should also be consistent with the applicant organization's established practices. Finally, all costs must be allowable per the federal cost principles and USDA and CDFA requirements. If your project is selected for funding, CDFA will remove all unallowable costs and activities as a condition of receiving an award, which means the budget could be decreased and project activities could be affected. There is no minimum or maximum number of pages for your completed budget narrative. We do ask that you do not change the formatting of the template except to add or delete rows. Please leave it as a Word document with 12-point Arial font and 1-inch margins. At the top of the Scope of Work template, enter the total amount of SCBGP funds requested for your project. As mentioned, this is the sum of budget narrative categories A through H and should match the amount listed in the budget summary table. Please make sure the total amount requested is within the allowable range and rounded to the nearest dollar. Note that for the additional assistance projects, the maximum award amount is $250,000. Here is what the budget narrative template looks like. You will complete the table and provide a brief summary of the costs requested beneath each table. The template includes instructions on how to complete each section, but we encourage you to email grants@cdfa.ca.gov if you have more specific questions. We can also set up a time to go over the budget in more detail one-on-one. I'd like to point out a few resources that may help you in developing a budget narrative. First, the Request for Concept Proposals is a valuable reference for outlining USDA and CDFA requirements. Within the instructions, you will find information about the federal cost principles, unallowable costs, indirect and direct costs, and travel in the requirements and limitations section, along with an example of a completed budget. More detailed information on allowable and unallowable costs can be found in the Allowable and Unallowable Cost and Activities table. This is probably the most user-friendly resource, however, it is not all-inclusive. The Procuring Goods and Services supplement provides guidance on the federal regulations for procurement transactions, such as hiring a contractor. For more detail about the federal regulations to determine allowable costs and ensure consistent treatment of costs, you can access the federal cost principles through links in the Request for Concept proposal. Remember that state, local, or Indian tribal governments, nonprofits, colleges, and universities are subject to the 2 CFR 200. Now we'll look at some things to consider when developing a proposal. First, the proposed project should primarily benefit California specialty crops. That means project activities should support specialty crops rather than an individual organization or individuals. Also, costs should be allowable, reasonable, and necessary. Again, you can find additional information in the allowable and unallowable costs and activities table included in the handouts. Second, the project should accomplish at least one program priority identified in the RFCP. The number of priorities isn't a factor in scoring criteria, so it isn't necessary to select more than one. Consider identifying the single priority that is closest to what your organization already does. Third, the project must be able to accomplish at least one outcome measure. Like program priorities, the number of outcome measures and indicators is not a factor in scoring criteria. It's most important that you select an outcome measure that can be reasonably achieved, measured, and reported upon within the grant duration. Also note that changes cannot be made to the outcome measures as written. We want to ensure that all projects selected through this process are successful. If your proposal is selected for funding, having a unique entity identifier, or UEI, and registration with SAM will ensure that the agreement can be executed promptly and the project can begin on its intended start date. If you have previously registered with SAM, you have automatically been assigned a UEI and can find it by logging into your organization's record on SAM. If you do not already have a UEI and registration with SAM, we strongly encourage you to begin the process immediately. If you are fiscally sponsored, we recommend your fiscal sponsor begin this process now if they are not already registered. The administrative requirements of federal funds are extensive and include all of the following. Grant costs, including the activities of salaried staff and any contractors or consultants, need to be tracked separately of and in addition to an organization's regular costs. Invoices must be submitted at least quarterly and no more frequently than monthly. Invoices are reimbursement-based, however, recipients may request advance payment for anticipated project costs. Reports must be submitted twice per year, including a final report at the end of the grant duration. You will need to retain all records, and they need to be easily accessible for 3 years after the federal award concludes, in this case through January 31st, 2032. Depending on the current staffing or structure of your organization, you may want to develop a budget that includes direct costs to administer the grant, either through additional staffing or through a contracted grant administrator. If you have questions about these requirements, again, please reach out for individual assistance. We'd like to briefly address some unallowable costs that may cause a project to be disqualified. All SCBGP projects are subject to the federal cost principles, and all organizations eligible for the Additional Assistance Program are subject specifically to 2 CFR 200. Some unallowable costs that frequently are included in proposals are donations, including personnel, supply, or indirect costs associated with donations. This includes distributing produce or cost associated with growing produce that will eventually be donated. Note that if educational activities are taking place, sampling of specialty crops or foods prepared with specialty crops is allowed. We recommend using a 3-bite rule of thumb when deciding whether something is a sample or a donation. Costs that benefit individuals rather than the specialty crop industry as a whole. Participant stipends are allowed but must be reasonable and justified. Generally, smaller stipends that offset the cost of attending a training or other educational event, such as transportation costs, are allowed. Larger stipends may be allowed if it can be demonstrated that participants are meaningfully contributing to the success of the grant project. For example, stipends for trainers or speakers are generally allowed for a reasonable cost. Stipends that serve an incentive purpose, that is, stipends that are designed to encourage participants to take part in an educational or training event, are generally not allowed. Material improvements, such as building or installing irrigation or paying establishment costs, are seen as providing an individual benefit to an organization or individual and are not allowable. Operational costs, that is, the general cost of doing business, are not allowable as these provide a direct benefit to the applicant organization. Costs must be directly related to the proposed project rather than to supporting the applicant organization generally. SCBGP funds cannot be expended in support of non-specialty crops where these costs cannot be clearly identified and tracked. This is often the case at farmers markets or similar venues which may provide specialty crops and non-specialty crops. Some costs are considered indirect costs and cannot be usually directly charged to the SCBGP grant. These include general office supplies like printer paper, pens, insurance, utilities, administrative staff salaries, etc. The indirect cost rate is set at 8% of the total salary and fringe benefit costs for both applicants and any contractors. Note that SCBGP projects does not have to include all of the activities your organization takes part in. For example, if your organization currently does nutrition education and distributes produce boxes, you could use SCBGP funds to cover an educational project while continuing produce distribution with other non-SCBGP funds. We recommend not discussing unallowable costs or activities in your proposal if possible. but unallowable costs that are essential to a proposed project may be covered using cost share. Again, please reach out to grants@cdfa.ca.gov with questions or for clarification. Here are a few quick tips for completing your application. Please do not convert the application into a different file format, as this may edit or remove the application's formatting. It may be helpful to draft your answers in Microsoft Word or another word processor so you can proofread and use spell check before copy and pasting into the application. Also, make sure to double check your budget for calculation errors or typos. And please don't wait until the last minute to work on your application. As a reminder, one-on-one assistance is limited to the first 20 eligible applicants. CDFA cannot guarantee technical assistance will be available closer to the application's due date, so reach out early for one-on-one support in completing your proposal. Finally, here's a list of resources within CDFA, SAM.gov, and USDA. That concludes the additional assistance presentation. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We look forward to receiving your proposals. If you have any additional questions or need additional assistance, please contact us at grants@cdfa.ca.gov.